Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 11, The Doomsters by Ross Macdonald. Hello and welcome to Point Blank. My name is Kurt, and joining me as always is Justin. Hi, Justin.
Hello, folks. This is the first of our two-part episodes, and I'm curious to see how this turns out. How are you doing today, Kurt?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to discussing Ross Macdonald's The Doomsters.
Yeah, this was a fun book. Interesting. Our first Ross and our first take at sort of the second generation of Private Eye writers. So I'm curious to see what you think about this one.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think our listeners will as well. I mean, it's an interesting choice because it's like the seventh book in the Lou Archer series. And, you know, the listeners might be wondering, well, why not choose the first one or one of his more favorite or more famous books, like the Galton case. But we chose this one because it's a major transition for Ross Macdonald. This is really the book that he starts finding his own voice and making Lou Archer his own character. And not to say that he was imitating Chandler and Hammett in the earlier works, but definitely he was more influenced by those in the first six. So this was an interesting one, and I think we saw that in the writing, and we'll talk about that later on.
Yeah, definitely. He was more blatantly influenced by Hammett and Chandler. He never denied it. That was part of the tradition by which he was building his own literary voice and career. But yeah, this is the first book where I guess he had some personal stuff in his life and maybe just a general maturity of his development as a writer. He really sort of changed the way he approached the character of Lou Archer, who we'll talk about later. And it's really cool for us because, you know, I've read Ross Macdonald. I've read a few of his books here and there, but I never really thought about him in terms of his trajectory and where he started and where he went. This was a fun read because we get to see the before and after sort of happening in the moment, and it makes me even more excited to see his even more mature work.
Yeah, plus I really like the title, The Doomsters.
I got to admit, I have a collection of his work. It's 4 volumes of novels, and I picked this one. I said, let's read The Doomsters, and I just did it because of the title.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like an 80s metal band name, maybe.
Yeah.
Or I was also thinking if you go Ross Macdonald and the Doomsters, it sounds like a California surf guitar band. It's like, this Saturday night at the Lava Lounge, join us.
Yeah.
They come live from sunny Southern California, Ross Macdonald and the Doomsters. Cue Dick Dale music right there.
I could see that. Or a 50s doo-wop band. And the Doomsters. It also, I thought it was going to be more, it sounded like a bunch of like real mopey nihilistic gangsters, but that's not where it ends up being. It's we'll talk about it later, of course, but it's connected to a poem. It's connected to a lot of stuff that's going on in Ross Macdonald's life at the time, a lot of real heavy psychological stuff. And so yeah, I wasn't expecting what we got, and I can't say I'm disappointed.
No, me neither. Well, so other than reading this book, Justin, what you been up to lately?
Oh, my Lord. I'm in the middle of a semester, and I've just been smothered with papers and grading, but I did get a little bit of time off, and I was able to do some traveling last week, and I went over to the Associated Writing Programs Conference. It's AWP. It's one of the biggest writing program conferences in the country. 10, 12, 15,000 people maybe. All writers, all looking to make it or break it or sell their stuff or listen to new literary talent or whatnot. But it was fun to be with a big group of writers talking about craft, and there were a few luminaries there that I was excited to see or hear about. George Saunders, Megan Abbott was there, or she was going to be. I was going to attend a panel discussion with her and try to pawn off a little bit of point blank propaganda, try to get her clued in on the show. but she ended up missing her flight or not being able to attend for some reason. So I missed that boat, unfortunately. But it was a good trip down in Florida, and then I went to LA. This is Macdonald country, Chandler country, the country where most of our private eyes are located, and sort of soaked up the sun while thinking about Ross Macdonald and the Doomsters. How about you?
I have been very just busy with work and some family stuff, so I really haven't had a lot of time for other things. But I've been getting excited. I've got a longboard island lager here preparing me. This is from Kona Brewing Company, and this is preparing for me for my trip to Hawaii tomorrow.
Oh, man. That'll be nice.
Yes. So hopefully by the time you listen to this, I had a great trip. It was a nice time. I've been there before, but I'm looking forward to it.
You're gonna have to develop a spam and longboard mystery series.
Yes, definitely the spam. I got excited for the show today. I played a little music. I don't normally do that before I get going, but I was listening to some Mastodon and the soundtrack to Atomic Blonde, which are both very good. So that kind of put me in a good mood to record the show.
That's good. I was recording some heavy metal guitar this morning. I was trying to get myself back into the mind of recording loud music, and I did, and I laid down a couple tracks, and that also sort of served as a little bit of fuel for this doom-laden novel that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, and speaking of fuel, the other thing, a little chaser for or I guess the beer is the chaser, but I've also got a small glass of Templeton Rye 4-year-old whiskey here. So supposedly this is Al Capone's favorite whiskey. I highly doubt that, but it's setting me into this good crime fiction mode.
Well, I'm glad we're on the same page. I just 2 days ago, I purchased a bottle of Redemption Rye, and I'm not a whiskey drinker, but I've been sort of willing myself toward trying to understand this exotic, important beverage. And so I poured myself a glass of rye and soda, and I'm sitting here with it right now. So cheers, Kurt.
Cheers. I guess as far as crime fiction related things go, the only things that I have been watching outside of what I was listening to before is I finished the second season of Hap and Leonard, which is based on the Joe R. Lansdale books. And that's really good. I really highly recommend that show. I love love Lansdale's books, and I think they've done a really nice job with the TV program. I think it really captures the spirit of the novels, and the actors portraying both Hap and Leonard do an excellent job. Highly recommend that. And the other one I just started last night is a series on Netflix. It's in German, so you have to read the subtitles, but it's based on the book series, which starts with Babylon Berlin, and this takes place. I'm going to do a review of this in 5-round burst, but just real quickly, it's a murder mystery kind of thing taking place in the Weimar Republic in late 1920s Germany, and so far the show is pretty good.
That sounds good. I have a book that I read, and frankly, because I've been so busy, I wasn't able to read a whole bunch of crime fiction this past month, but I read a book that I'm going to talk about in more detail in 5-round bursts, but it's The Hunter by Richard Stark, and it's a classic anti-hero story. One of these stories that we haven't spent a lot of time discussing anti-heroes, and we actually had a comment today on our Facebook page by one of our dedicated fans, and he asked us about maybe down the road talking in more detail about what makes an anti-hero as a character. How do we get these characters who ultimately and often are unlikable? They don't have the characteristics of a hero. It's hard to find a reason to appreciate them. How do they work? How do we find ways of making those characters work as writers, and how do they work as readers for us? So I think down the road we're going to talk about this in more detail, and I'm looking forward to taking an episode to maybe a subject unknown to talking about anti-heroes, and it'll maybe prompt us to read more books with anti-heroes as the primary or protagonist character.
Yeah, I was really excited about that question as well. I think that's a really great topic, and I thank our listener for bringing that up. I was already eyeballing some stuff on my bookshelf that might be appropriate. I have a sociological work on bandits, and particularly social banditry, and I think that speaks a little bit to our our appeal or love of these anti-heroes, the outlaws and pirates and gangsters and bank robbers and stuff like that. So
Indeed.
We'll take a look at that in a future episode.
Cool.
On to 5-round burst. 5-round burst is when we do 5 reviews in roughly 5 minutes. First up, we have a classic, The Grifters by Jim Thompson. This came out in 1963, and I have to thank actually the bookstore at the New Orleans airport, because I was out of books. Coming back from work this time, I went to their crime fiction section, and lo and behold, there was a copy of a Jim Thompson book I had not yet read.
Thank God.
Yes, thanks. Whoever curates that, you are a hero. This is classic Jim Thompson. It's a story of a con artist, Roy Dillon, his mother, Lily, and sometime girlfriend, Moria Langtry. The story, it just delivers a tale of who's conning who and which among them is really the most dangerous. It's delivered in a style that really only Thompson can achieve. And like a baseball bat to the gut, this one is a hit. And really, all I need to say at this point is if it's Jim Thompson, I'm probably going to love it. The second book is Babylon Berlin, which I mentioned earlier. This is by, I'm going to butcher this guy's name, but Volker Kushner. This is the first book in the Garon Wrath series, and there is, like I said, now a show on Netflix that you can watch based on the series. It was originally published in German in 2007. It came out with an English translation in 2016. It's set during Germany's Weimar Republic. Detective Wrath is plunged into a crazy world of Berlin in that late 1920s. There's clubs and speakeasies, dance halls, gangsters, and more political factions than you can count. As Wrath is tossed from one to the other, and he follows a series of murders that continue circling around this search for a whole lot of gold that has been smuggled in from Russia after the fall of the Tsars. It has a great setting. I don't know why there isn't more fiction set in this setting. It's probably because it's so chaotic that it's almost hard to make sense of. You know, it's a time like after the Russian Revolution or during the Spanish Civil War. At the same time, there are so many political factions fighting it out that, Germany, obviously the Nazis won out, but it could have gone any number of different ways politically. And they were all basically battling it out at the street. So it's a wonderful setting for a crime fiction piece. I thought the plotting of this was maybe a little bit rough, but that could be due to part of the translation and part of due to the political intrigue and maybe just not being familiar with the names. But like punching a Nazi in the face, this one is a hit.
All right, so my contribution to this round of 5-round burst is The Hunter by Richard Stark, a.k.a. Donald Westlake. You might know him for writing like 4,000 books. This was originally published by Pocket Books in 1962. Set in New York, our protagonist is Parker, a master criminal and tough guy who commits just enough larceny to pay the bills in a nice hotel for a year or so while he drinks and courts women. But someone has disrupted his pattern. An associate, Mal Resnick, double-crosses him on a setup that would have netted him a few years' worth of dough. Mal and Parker's wife left him for dead, however, and fled with the cash. Thing is, Parker didn't die, and now he's seeking revenge for the betrayal. Does he find the revenge he is looking for? Oh, definitely, in spades. This is a lean, spare, hard-hitting novel with a ton of action and cool, sharp dialogue. Is Parker lovable? Not exactly. He's an anti-hero, like I said before, and I struggle to appreciate his sort of ultra-masculine, tough guy anti-heroism. It sometimes tends towards misogyny, but this story is special. The setup is solid, and Act 3 alone is worth the price of admission. The tension and the stakes get higher and higher, and the payoff, so to speak, surprises. Good stuff, a kill shot just above the belt.
Up next, we have Double Wide by Leo W. Banks. This came out in 2017 from Brash Books. This is a Western noir, and it does strongly remind me of early Joe R. Lansdale. The main character is Whip Stark, former professional baseball player and pitcher who has escaped celebrity and some allegations of drug use to live in a rundown trailer park in the desert outside of Tucson. And this trailer park is filled with a gang of, 8 misfits in this little community, which Whip Stark is called the mayor of. Early in the book, a box appears at the door of his trailer, and inside are the severed hands of his former catcher, Rolando Molina. This throws Whip into a search for his former teammate and into the hands of smugglers and corrupt sports agents. I really thought that Banks did a great job with a lot of dialogue and setting. Some of his descriptions were great. They felt, classic but modern, hard-boiled at the same time. A little bit of this plot sort of fell through for me. I didn't necessarily... There's a bit of a twist at the end as far as what the motivations for these murders and things are. And that part, it kind of fell apart. But I still would recommend this book. I think it's still a hit. It's just inside the strike zone. Or maybe it's a hit that's just a solid base hit. I do expect to see some home runs from Banks in the future. And last today, I've got Norway by Night by Derek Millar. This came out in 2013 from Mariner Books. And this one has won a lot of awards, which, it's gotten a lot of reviews that sort of propel it beyond the genre of crime fiction that it's in. And it definitely is literary crime fiction, and that might not be to everyone's taste. We follow Sheldon Horowitz, a grumpy, widowed former watchmaker and former sniper who was served in the Korean War, as he leaves New York City to move to Norway with his granddaughter Ria and her Norwegian husband Lars. One day, an argument is heard in the upstairs apartment. A boy and his mother flee, and Sheldon takes them in. The mother is killed, and the boy and Sheldon go on the run from some Eastern European mafiosa. They go on the run in a country that neither of them knows. They don't share a common language, and Sheldon's mind may be going. This book explores age and memory, loss, and our internal selves. And at times, it seems a masterpiece. And this would be such a solid hit for me, but the ending, it left me feeling a bit unsatisfied. While the ending was tough for me, I would still give this one a hit. There are some just beautiful passages in the middle of the book, and it lingers with you. It makes you think. At least for some readers, you may be disappointed in the end.
You mentioned reading The Grifters. Have you seen the film by chance?
I have not.
No, I saw it, and now it's not a stone cold classic, but it's pretty solid. John Cusack and Angelica Houston in the 1990s. So I would encourage you to check that out and see how it stacks up to the book, because I haven't read the book, and I think I'm starting to, after your review, get the itch for a little more Jim Thompson. I frankly haven't read him since our first episode, and we're now at episode 11. So I think it's about time I go back and revisit him and see how he stacks up.
Well, this one was a quick read. I finished the whole book on my flight, so it weighs in at a light 200 pages.
Okay, light is the key word there. Cool.
Subject
Well, Subject Unknown is our part of the show where we pick sort of a random topic and talk about it. But this time we are going to focus in on our author that we're featuring in today's episode. And we're going to talk about Ross Macdonald, a.k.a. real name Ken Millar, and his wife, Margaret Millar. This is the first husband and wife a set of writers. I do not want to call them a writing team because that is not how they operated. But we're going to talk about these mystery authors. I mean, they were both extremely successful. Both Ken Millar and Margaret Millar, between the two of them, there's almost 50 books that they both wrote. Millar would write 19 Archer books and 6 other novels. Margaret would write 8 novels that were in a couple of different series and 19 other novels. They were both awarded Grand Master Awards for the Mystery Writers of America, Ken Millar in 1974 and Margaret in 1983. Margaret also won an Edgar for her 1956 book, Beast in View. You'll also find both of their names on many top 100 lists of the best 20th century crime fiction. So it's amazing to me, first of all, their output, the success that both of them had. They were both gifted writers. They did help each other out a little bit, but not all that much. And they're both from a relatively small town of, essentially a suburb of Toronto. They grew up together. Ken said he was going to marry Margaret when he was in high school, and lo and behold, that's what they did. They spent their entire lives together. And despite that, I mean, they had an interesting relationship and went through a lot of tough stuff together. But, how do they do this? Let's look a little bit at their process.
Well, right off the bat, I'll say I don't know how they did it. I imagine that it would be incredibly difficult to have two A-type personalities living under one roof and essentially competing in the same field and somehow succeeding. It sort of boggles the mind that they managed to pull this off, especially given how contentious their household seemed. While I get the impression based on my readings in the biography we read by Tom Nolan and some other work, that they had their moments where they shared, especially early in the career, like Margaret, or she went by Maggie at times, would share her work, her early drafts with Ross, or who went by Ken, and they would, sort of give each other positive feedback and critical advice and that kind of thing. He would do the same with his early detective stories and whatnot. But, later on, she achieved fame, and it started to create a problem in the household because at that point, Ken was not making any money because he had went off to the Navy. He was trying to finish his PhD thesis at the University of Michigan. So her finding success before him created sort of a wedge between them and a competitive sort of frustrating thing that was sort of happening between them. And it led to hostility that was not just private, but also something that's noticed in a lot of the friends who would talk about or be interviewed for the book, for the biography, just talking about the way that they interacted with each other. It seemed like a really sort of hostile, competitive type of environment. So the fact that they were both able to pull this off successfully with minor repercussions to themselves, their daughter, that's another story. It's pretty astounding that they did this.
There's a couple things about this story which are still crazy, even though we've seen this repeatedly throughout many of the writers that we've talked about, and that is Margaret originally gets into publishing as a way to make a quick buck. They're desperate for money when Ken is working on his PhD. They have their young daughter, Linda, and she was brought up on detective novels, and she basically says, well, I can do better than this. And Ken says, well, why don't you? So she cranks out a novel. Basically, I think she did her first draft in like 15 days or something like that. First of all, the idea that you're just going to crank out a novel to make a quick buck is insane today.
Well, let's go back to her origin story just a little bit. At age 8, she discovered her brother's copy of the pulp magazine Black Mask. That's where she first started off. She got that Black Mask introduction to crime fiction, and this was in Ontario, which was like a working class town. Kitchener, I think, is the name of it. And so we know a whole lot about Ross Macdonald. This name, I didn't have to dig hard to find this name. This name came to me as soon as I started to investigate noir and hard-boiled literature. However, I was not privy to Margaret Millar. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know who she was until I read the biography of Ross Macdonald. Why is that? Why do we not hear about this person who won Edgar Awards, who put out 17 books, who is known for literary suspense? Just like, we know, who did we just talk about? Literary suspense author, Patricia Highsmith, who wrote in the 1950s and 60s and gained a cult following and then rose to fame. Why don't we know anything about Maggie Millar? She wrote female characters. She wrote about Black power and ambition. She wrote about issues of psychological, sanity and whatnot. Why don't we know anything about this character, whereas we know everything about Ross Macdonald? Is this just sexism? Is there something else? I haven't read any of her work. I don't know what her books are. Why? What is that? Is that me? Is that the industry?
I think there's a couple of things at play. And yes, I think sexism is one of them. But also, I think the fact that Ken Millar, or Ross Macdonald, has a series character with 19 books that is the bulk of his work is what sort of holds that together. Margaret had a couple of characters that appeared in 2 or maybe 3 books, but nothing that was long running. And those were not the ones that won awards, by the way. So I think that's one thing. I think during the career of when both of them were writing, another thing that came through in the Ross Macdonald biography that we read is that Ken was much more willing to do interviews, go to conferences, talk with other writers, where Margaret was a bit abrasive and she was very dismissive of people that she didn't, she said she would talk very bluntly to people's faces. If she didn't like you, she basically kicked you out of the house. She was not necessarily a people person.
She sort of sounds like Patricia Highsmith, sort of that hostile, little maybe misanthropic tendency, whereas Ken was the people person, the gregarious, or maybe the guy who wanted to work the personality of the writer into his career.
Yeah, I mean, they were both kind of weirdos, but I think Ken was willing to engage with the outside world a little bit more, where Margaret was very much a homebody. And I would imagine that has a lot to do with why we don't know her as well, because, even in that day, you got to play the PR game if you want to get your name out there. And Ken was very good at playing the PR game.
And you make a good point about the series. Would we know about Chester Himes if he didn't write the Gravedigger Jones and Coffin Ed series? I don't know. There's in all likelihood, would we know anything about if he hollers? No, probably not. I mean, these books aren't necessarily. It doesn't really matter if they're good or bad. It's just posterity and the number of the quantity of your readership and the longevity of a series. You're going to automatically draw in more readers, and you're going to create a market for yourself just because you're going to have every 1 or 2 years a book that people seek out because they're drawn to the specific character that you created. So yeah, if you don't have that, the book might be a great success, but 2 or 3 generations later, is it still around? Well, maybe not. And if it's not around, you're not around. So I guess there would be that being a factor here.
Now that I've seen her name, and I believe I'd seen her name before, but I hadn't, because of the Ross Macdonald, Ken Millar name thing, I hadn't put the two together. But now that I know her name, I've seen her on more lists than I thought I would have seen her on. So within many critics or people, making these best of lists, she's still out there. She's just not as well known as Ross Macdonald.
Well, perhaps not for long. I'm excited about reading some of her work and investigating, where she stands in comparison to her husband and in comparison to the other thriller novelists of the era. I like to think that she's pretty good. She won an Edgar. I mean, we should give her a chance.
Yeah, and I think she is definitely worthy of her own episode. Let's talk just real briefly about how they're, we were talking about, well, how do you do this as 2 writers living in the same house? They did have a working relationship where I believe Margaret would work in the morning, and she would basically work till noon. Ken would do his other things in the morning, and then he would start writing at noon, and they kind of really never saw each other all that much. So that was part of the friction in their life, but that's also how they got stuff done. They didn't interrupt each other while they were writing. They took care of all their household responsibilities and other distractions while the other one was having their writing time. So in that way, they knew what the other person needed to accomplish the work that they were trying to do.
That's interesting, because some of the stuff I noted in the biography from Ross's perspective was that he felt like there was too much distance between them, to the point where he would raise frustrated pleas to have more of a connection. So perhaps the barriers were drawn so significantly for work productivity that they perhaps affected relationship, connection. And that's, I'm not going to comment on that so much because I don't know, other than hearsay. But I think that the way that we draw lines, the way that we create sort of these disciplined lines in order to get work done, while also being in a partnership or a relationship, it's tricky, and it doesn't work the same way for all people. And so, yeah, I find that curious. I mean, they also raised a daughter together in the same household while also maintaining these literary careers independently. And I don't want to talk too much about the daughter now, but the daughter got into trouble. There was a lot of conflict in that household. And I think part of the reason, based on what I've read, is that there was these lines were drawn, and there was some sort of like emotional disconnects between them because of their high productivity. There was something that lost. And I wonder how that impacted the quality of life in their situation. I can't say for certain.
Yeah.
And I don't give a fuck. So why I don't want to talk too much about their personal lives.
Yeah, that's fair enough. We don't, I mean, there's, we don't want to talk too much about their personal lives, but, people did say it was contentious at times. But they also, they also seem to have a very loving relationship at other times. They enjoyed a lot of activities together. They were really big into bird watching. They were highly involved in political activities, or the early environmental movement was important to both of them. There's some very touching stories of them in their older age, when Margaret was going blind and Ken was suffering from Alzheimer's, that the two of them would work together as a pair to get the things done, and they sort of, in a way, became one in the end. And everybody's got rocky parts in their life, but the things that these two did succeed at is tremendous, and whatever they did, it worked.
Yeah. Whatever strange calculus they used to make their relationship and their literary careers work, hats off to them, because it's not always easy, and they pulled it off somehow. For what, they were together for 50 years? I mean, they were together their entire lives.
And once again, it's time for Really Stupid Mysteries.
All right, today we have a new series for you. This is a tribute to Ken and Margaret Millar and their love for birdwatching. I bring you The Dead Don't Chirp, a Reginald Worthington Royal Birdwatching Society mystery.
Are there other books in this series?
Oh, I'm sure there are. I have at least 4 here. His acclaimed follow-up to The Dead Don't Chirp is The Early Bird Gets Shot.
Followed by What's Good for the Goose is Good for the Gander.
And don't forget his noir classic, Night Owl.
Or Who Done It? Asked the Owl.
Oh my God. Oh, beautiful. Okay. How about this one? I really love this one. Birds of a Feather Die Together.
Ooh, that is one of my favorites in the series. Although I did like the con game hijinks of Robin the Robins.
Very nice. And he did branch away from bird watching. He got into more domestic birding. His lesser-known chicken mystery started with Foul Play.
Oh, ouch. Ouch.
Yeah, digging pretty deep in the barrel here.
Well, Reginald did go after a serial killer in the Kingfisher Killings.
Ooh, very nice. And there were others, but we're still digging them up from the archives. So
there is a new release coming soon, Justin.
Oh, I did not hear of this one.
That is The Coot Caper.
Very good. Very good.
Before we end part 1 of our discussion of the Doomsters, we're going to do our initial review. And when the second episode airs in about 2 weeks, this will give you a little bit of a chance to read the book if you want. And we do highly recommend this one, I think. Justin, what were your initial impressions of the Doomsters?
So my first impression was largely positive. This is a private detective novel. So it has the setup, the premise that I was expecting. We meet Lou Archer, the first page. It's early in the morning. And we dive right into the narrative. I like Lou Archer as a character. I like Ross Macdonald's writing. He is a smart writer. He got a PhD at Michigan in English, and it shows. He's really good with description. He's really good with tying in psychological and philosophical themes in a story that's action-packed most of the time. Sometimes the story gets a little bit bogged down with monologue or with like internal musings, and I felt like it would stall out on occasion. But overall, I really like this story. I like the California setting. Chandler already laid the foundations for that. I like the rich family that's sort of in decay, sort of the Southern Gothic qualities of that. It reminds me of Faulkner and the Southern Writers. Overall, I thought that the story was riveting. It was not too long. The dialogue was sharp. I'd give it 4 kill shots, maybe 4.5. I'm sort of holding out. I'm sort of on the fence still. Maybe our conversation will help to clarify that for me. What about you?
This is definitely a book where context is key. I felt that for me, this is a 4 out of 5 as well. I think that knowing that the Doomsters is a transition novel, that this is an insight into the Ross Macdonald of things to come, that makes me excited for what I'm seeing in this book. Knowing that it isn't a perfect novel going into it, I think actually in many ways makes it better to me. Had someone told me Ross Macdonald is the greatest American detective fiction writer of the 20th century and handed me this book, I might have been a little bit disappointed. But knowing that there's all these books that come after it, knowing how critics responded to, particularly the book that comes after it, the Galton affair.
The Galton case, yeah. I've heard very good things about it.
Yeah, the Galton case and all the other things that come after this novel, knowing that this is just a peek into the true voice of Ross Macdonald and a true look at what would really shape the character of Archer, then it just propels this book forward for me. I did think that his writing is solid in here. I love what he does with a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the inner thoughts of Archer. The setting is great. I liked the themes that came up in the book. I did think it was a little weak as far as, I guess, structure. I thought it did fall apart in a couple little bits. And at the end, I guess I'm not giving anything away to say it. Towards the end, there's a bit of an info dump.
Yes, definitely. I was thinking that specifically when I was explaining my criticisms of this book. The monologue, it was an info dump, and that's really what it was. And that affected me too.
Yeah. Is it a perfect book? No, but is it still a great book? Yes. So we'll be, of course, getting into the full analysis in part 2 of this episode.
So, folks, you got 2 more weeks. In our new format, we do this setup here, and we want to get you enticed to read the book. So you have 2 more weeks before we drop our full spoiler-laden, in-depth analysis and discussion of the Doomsters. So if you don't have a copy already and you're eager to check it out, we highly encourage it. It's a good book. I recommend getting, if you can find it, a book, an omnibus that has several of his pieces of fiction. I got this book along with the Galton case and 2 others in one Library of America copy. And I can't wait because I'm going to dive into the Galton case next. So we look forward to talking with each other about this book and also hearing what you think and see what you feel about this book as well, because it's a good one. You know, it's not perfect, but there's enough here that I think it's going to make for a lively conversation.
Yeah, and it's only weighs in at about 250 pages. It's definitely something that you can probably finish in the next 2 weeks. So I would recommend it. And we look forward to having you join us for part 2 of The Doomsters by Ross Macdonald.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.